In the late 1770s, as the American Revolution raged on, there was a quieter but no less revolutionary movement unfolding across the colonies. One that questioned the very ideals of freedom and equality upon which the new nation was being founded. This was the expansion of state constitutions and the contentious debate over slavery. While men took up arms against British tyranny, intellectual battles were being fought in state assemblies, where the concepts of liberty and justice were being redefined through emerging laws and charters. In this moment, we witness a critical yet paradoxical period in America's history, where the fight for freedom came face to face with the reality of enslavement. The colonies had long been divided on the issue of slavery, with some northern states beginning to view it as morally incompatible with their newly proclaimed ideals, while southern states relied heavily on enslaved labor for their agricultural economies. But as the movement for independence gained momentum, the question loomed larger. How could a nation proclaim itself a beacon of freedom while millions remained in chains? State constitutions as well as new legal reforms would soon become the battlefield where this struggle played out. The Declaration of Independence had declared all men are created equal, but for many, it was unclear if this applied universally or only to those deemed worthy by societal standards. The struggle to align political ideals with social reality was complex, emotional, and divisive. Following the break from Britain, several colonies took on the monumental task of drafting their own constitutions. For some, like Pennsylvania, Vermont, and Massachusetts, this was an opportunity to embed the revolutionary ideals of equality and personal liberty into the very fabric of their governance. It was here in the founding documents of states that we see the first tremors of a shifting mindset regarding slavery. Take Pennsylvania, for instance. In 1776, the state drafted a constitution that outlined radical democratic principles, including a single-chamber legislature and voting rights for all free men. It wasn't explicitly anti-slavery, but its tone and ideals set a precedent for change. By 1780, Pennsylvania had passed the Act for the Gradual Abolition of Slavery, becoming the first state to formally begin the process of eradicating the institution within its borders. Vermont took an even bolder approach. When it drafted its constitution in 1777, it became the first place in North America to ban slavery outright. This act was remarkable not only for its decisiveness but also because it happened during a time when the concept of emancipation was still unthinkable in many parts of the world. In Massachusetts, the Constitution of 1780, largely drafted by John Adams, declared that all men are born free and equal, which would later be used as a basis in court to challenge and ultimately abolish slavery in the state. These pioneering moves in northern states set a tone of liberation and highlighted a growing consciousness that slavery was incompatible with the principles for which the revolution was fought. While these progressive changes swept through the northern states, the southern colonies had a vastly different reaction. Enslaved labor was the economic backbone of states like Virginia, South Carolina, and Georgia. Many Southern leaders, including prominent founding fathers like Thomas Jefferson, were deeply conflicted. They recognized the philosophical contradictions of advocating liberty while holding people in bondage, yet they were bound by the economic and social structures that slavery supported. Nonetheless, even in the South, a quiet but significant shift began to stir. The concept of manumission, the voluntary freeing of enslaved individuals by their owners, saw an uptick. In states like Virginia, where the economy relied heavily on slavery, some slave owners began freeing individuals as an acknowledgement of the ideals of the Revolution. Although this was not a sweeping abolitionist movement, it reflected a change in attitudes among some, even if only as an act of personal conviction rather than law. Legal battles also played a critical role in challenging and reshaping the institution of slavery during this period. In Massachusetts, the state's new constitution would soon be tested. In the landmark cases of Quock Walker and Brom and Bett, enslaved individuals sued for their freedom, arguing that the Massachusetts Constitution's statement on liberty applied to them. These cases shook the legal foundations of slavery in Massachusetts. and by 1783, slavery was effectively abolished in the state. These legal victories set powerful precedents. They demonstrated that the revolutionary ideals enshrined in new state constitutions could be more than just words. They could be wielded as tools of liberation. For abolitionists, these cases offered hope that the law itself might be used to dismantle slavery, one state at a time. While northern states took steps toward emancipation, the road was far from easy or uniform. New York, for instance, would not pass its gradual emancipation law until 1799, and even then, it specified that children born to enslaved mothers would remain in bondage until they reached a certain age. The transition was slow, and many northern states allowed for gradual emancipation that left many enslaved individuals in bondage for years, if not decades, to come. In the South, resistance to abolition was even fiercer. Southern leaders argued that the northern states' push to end slavery threatened their economic interests and social structure. This growing sectional divide over slavery would only deepen in the years to come, setting the stage for a national crisis that would culminate in the Civil War. During this period, printed pamphlets, newspapers, and other publications became crucial in shaping public opinion on slavery. Figures like Thomas Paine continued to write persuasively about liberty and equality, questioning how a nation that prided itself on these principles could tolerate slavery. Paine's writings, alongside those of others in the growing abolitionist movement, stirred public discourse and challenged Americans to confront the contradictions of their revolution. Meanwhile, African-American writers and activists like Phyllis Wheatley and Lemuel Haynes began to contribute their voices to the discourse, often calling upon the ideals of the revolution as a plea for universal freedom. Their contributions were significant, adding a personal and moral weight to the conversation that could not be ignored. Wheatley, an enslaved poet, eloquently argued that African Americans were equally deserving of the freedom proclaimed by the Declaration of Independence. Haynes, a mixed-race preacher and Revolutionary War veteran, preached sermons that condemned slavery as antithetical to Christian teachings. While the revolution didn't end slavery outright, it planted seeds of change that would grow over the coming decades. The moral and philosophical groundwork laid by state constitutions, abolitionist writings, and landmark court cases began to challenge the institution of slavery in a way that had never been done before. For the enslaved people who lived through this era, the promises of freedom were often painfully unfulfilled. Yet the revolution marked a turning point, opening doors to ideas and movements that would eventually lead to the abolition of slavery. In the northern states, gradual emancipation laws set the stage for a free labor society, and in the South, even as resistance held firm, a crack had been made in the institution's armor. The expansion of state constitutions and the emergence of new laws regarding slavery during the Revolution represent one of the great paradoxes in American history. A nation that declared itself a bastion of liberty grappled with the reality that millions remained unfree. The compromises and contradictions of this period reflected the complexities of a society attempting to reinvent itself. In the years following the Revolution, the ideals expressed in these early constitutions would be revisited and revised as the United States struggled to live up to its founding principles. The tension between freedom and enslavement would continue to shape American identity, culminating in the Civil War and the eventual abolition of slavery through the 13th Amendment. But the seeds of that transformation were planted in the Revolutionary era, when courageous individuals from politicians to poets dared to question the status quo and envision a world where liberty and justice could be truly universal. The legacy of these early state constitutions, court battles, and abolitionist writings remains a testament to the power of ideals, even in the face of deeply ingrained institutions. As the young nation continued to grow and define itself, these foundational struggles reminded it of the unfinished work of the Revolution, the promise of freedom that extended to all, not just a select few. The expansion of state constitutions and laws regarding slavery during this period stands as a pivotal chapter in the American journey toward a more just and equal society. a testament to the complex and often contradictory path to liberty.